My fellow citizens of all nations, imagining a society ruled by Nietzschean politics is very intriguing and very interesting at the same time. First of all, we have to understand that that type of society might look alien for us. That's how different it would be. Correct political system with correct culture is that it is nihilistic, and partly Nietzsche blames it on Christianity, which basically fueled self-destructive nihilism. The reason why the civilization faces collapse from Nietzschean standpoint is that basically society faces a mental problem. And by the way, the argument that certain people like to make that a Nietzschean political society would be basically a Nazi society is quite disproved. In fact, Nietzsche was against this type of ideologies. Basically, Nietzsche was forced to account for mass society in terms of constitutional alteration of human nature by Christianity. It followed that any political solution to nihilism would have to flow from the few higher types not ruined by Christianity. From Nietzschean political society, if we were to imagine it, there should be a higher class of people, preferably philosophers, in case of Nietzsche, people that have transcended in a certain sense this brokenness which is brought by nihilism and nihilistic ideologies, and which have a healthy moral attitude toward life. But for Nietzschean morals and the ethics we know today are drastically different things, and these type of people preferably should lead society. And actually in the article brings in interesting statement that for Nietzsche basically role model was the ancient Greek society, which had basically slaves and slave labor. And for Nietzsche, and it is assumption, he might assume that here's this perfect ancient Greek society. It is based on a slave labor. Therefore, certain classes, basically, class system is needed for certain class to work, while other classes, higher classes, will just advance the civilization. And Nietzsche was in favor of not telling slaves that they are the slaves. I think the ideology would basically not tell the lower classes or lower castes, not classes, but castes, that they were the lower castes, but they would be the lower caste. Because at the same time, they have to listen to the directives of the higher classes. Every time I start imagine the Nietzschean society, I think it would be a society that has values based on own and in power. And let's not forget the attitude Nietzsche has toward the power. The power is for Nietzsche most important thing. Individual desire for power would be the most important in this society. And I'm going to basically offer you a vision, a Nietzschean society. And because here is how I think about it, this type of society would look like. It would be highly technological society, highly advanced in terms of technology, in terms of development. I think it would be the most advanced known societies, but at the same time it would be cool to look at correct society. The correct society, which is based on the certain moral values, for example, there's a strong one. And this type of society that we live in today mostly tries to help the unfortunate, and it sort of like directs resources, directs money, charities, and etc. exist basically to fuel and support the unfortunate. While in the Nietzschean society, it would be opposite. The same resources would be gathered, but not to support the unfortunate, but to support the powerful, to make them even more powerful. Support, for example, different things that bring people a sense of power, whether it would be exploring the space, whether it would be like directing the innermost amount of resources toward developing certain type of stuff that would make humanity and human beings much more powerful. So the resources would be gathered, but not to support the unfortunate. Now, unfortunate would be told that you are weak and unfortunate and you have to die. And the resources need to be directed toward the powerful, so the society can benefit from it. When we talk about the resources and the power, I think it is very important to make it clear that Nietzschean society would direct enormous amount of resources toward the power itself. What would make society feel more powerful? What would make individual feel more powerful? And the resources would be directed toward that, not towards stuff that would make, for example, society feel mercy. As for the religion, I cannot imagine, for example, a Nietzschean society to be a monogamous society, because we cannot forget the Dionysus. And I think this type of society would be non-monogamous society, clearly non-monogamous society that favors alcohol, that really favors the wine party, and that embraces life in its own sense. It's not sexless, for example, society put up this some sort of an image. No, I think it would be opposite. I think it would be a society full of wine and non-monogamous type relationships. And I think for Nietzsche, the relationships comes down to power. Not sure exactly how it does so, like power in what sense, in what details we need to go down to. And above all, I think this type of society would have a very little concern on opinion of, for example, minorities, or opinion of people or cultures that it considers different. I don't think that this type of society would be tolerant society. I don't think this type of society would show any sort of tolerance / understanding toward other cultures and other societies. As for the relation to God and gods, like fundamentally, the Nietzschean society would not be a godless society. I don't think so. I think Nietzschean society would have gods, but not in its singular form, and I think it would be understood in terms of a power. Again, a god that, for example, lived and died, but the power remains, and it's up to us, up to this society, and up to this civilization to harness the power. It would be sort of understood this way, and I think at this point I should write this fantasy book. Yeah, I think it would understand, the society itself would understand that the god lived, God existed somehow, it died, but the power of God remains in nature, in scientific form, and through science, through living, through our way of life, we can harness the power of God. And this type of society could also assume this type of thing, like the image the God as a programmer, the original writer. Basically, the God died and the original author, original programmer is dead, but the laws the programmer has put in while the programmer lived, when he was alive, is still on, and it has not been turned off. So it's sort of like a more interesting understanding, and it's like completely my assumption. I cannot prove it any shape or form. And the final point for the Nietzschean society is death, and how it would be basically a death. I think for a Nietzschean society it would be clearly a bad thing. I don't think that Nietzschean society would consider death a good thing, but I don't think that it would also consider it a bad thing. The great example that comes to my mind would be when Ubermensch basically comes down from the mountains, comes down from his solitude, and he basically witnesses a first death. And I think the statement that Ubermensch states is that he tells basically this person that dies is that you can die with peace, like there is nothing after death. And I think that's the attitude the Nietzschean society would have toward death, because it's not welcomed necessarily that you are striving toward power, toward the life in its fullest form, and you are going to face death. And it is clearly unfortunate, but at the same time, die without worrying, like there is nothing to mourn about or complain about, because there is nothing after death. And you can die with peace of mind, because you can be for certain sure that neither reward nor punishments awaits you after this. You will just cease to exist, and this is the greatest, probably a blessing a Nietzschean society would sort of offer to people. And I think this would be the greatest mercy and greatest blessing, because if we were to look at how the religious society looks at it today, it's like it offers you most likely eternal torture after death, because come on, I mean, who goes to heaven at this point? And it offers you either eternal reward for a finite amount of life, or eternal damnation. again, for finite amount of life. Like imagine you could live 150 years maximum, and you basically should face like limitless, not just limited, but limitless amount of reward for the things you've done within that limited finite period of time, or like again limitless punishment for for life you experience finite amount. And come on, most people who don't even live that much, like even like 100 would be a great achievement for most people in this day and age. It's not like healthcare is affordable for all. In a pragmatical sense, many that have listened so far to this might argue that, oh, how cruel the Nietzschean society would tell the weak and unfortunate to just die, but yet at the same time we have this as a factual fact that the ideologies that claim, for example, today that we deserve eternal reward or eternal punishment based on what we will do on this life, on this finite amount of time. In either way, it is not a rational. And would you consider it a just behavior? Like we, for example, condemn the dictators that have committed genocides in history. We condemn what different sort of dictators have committed throughout history and different murderers. But the point I'm trying to make is that you would probably, and I assume you would condemn the human beings that commit genocide or committed genocide and perpetrators of that type of behavior. And I assume you would be like, these people deserve jail time and etc. But at the same time, the victims of the tyrant did not suffer eternally. The victims of the tyrannies of the tyrants basically suffered temporarily. You compare a heavenly being to this tyrant, basically. This tyrant that decides to impose eternal punishment or eternal reward for finite amount of time. And which one is more cruel at the end of the day? I don't consider it just to offer someone an eternal punishment or eternal reward for something that they've done in finite amount of time. I think it would be much more just to allow them to disappear instead of, if they committed like really atrocious crimes, okay, let's it be like 1,000 years of torture and make them disappear. Like do not make it like forever. Like this is absurdly tyrannical belief. And this is how basically I would image Nietzschean society, and I think Nietzschean politics. And don't forget, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and comment down below. How do you think Nietzschean society would look at birth, life, and death? There is three things. It would be very interesting if you were to share your thoughts with me about this issue.